Good afternoon, legislators and guests. Welcome to Forestry Day at the Legislature 2023. I'm Julia Grant. I am an active Society of American Foresters member, SAF, and I'm also the Director of Policy, Partnerships, and Sustainability for Green Diamond Resource Company. Today marks the 24th Forestry Day at the Legislature, hosted by SAF, but in partnership with many of the members of our forest industry from across this great state of Idaho. And a number of my fellow SAF members are here today. And so I was just going to ask them to stand up so you can see who they are. And I'd like to recognize them for their contributions to the advancement of sustainable forest management in the U.S. Thank you. Nationally, SAF is a 10,000 member plus community. And those of us that are here today, we want to be a resource for you all as decision makers. We want to keep forests as forests. We want to manage them in urban environments and in rural environments for their myriad of benefits. Those benefits include building products, carbon storage, soil stabilization, wildlife habitat, and the filtration of both air and water. Let us support you in making sound forest policy for the forests and their associated natural resources. You will see at the tables, there is we don't have a free lunch here, you have a little homework. This is a handout that talks about some of the top issues for forests and how we can be a resource to you. It has our contact information so you can call us if you need some advice from a forester. And with that, I just want to thank the legislators for being such good public servants to all of us from across the state of Idaho and for attending this event today. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Hi, I'm Peter Stegner with Riley Stegner & Associates, and we have the pleasure of helping put this on every year. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you to our sponsors who are all here, which you'll be hearing from. And I wanted to let you know that today's theme, we have kind of two buckets that we want to talk to you about. The first is we want to introduce you to some of the industry participants in the room. But then we also want to talk to you about some of the challenges that we have moving forward, namely workforce for our industry. I know you've heard that from all the industries that you work with, but this is workforce has been a problem for our industry for the last 15 years. It's not associated with COVID. COVID has made it worse, but it is a dire issue that we are working diligently with a lot of our partners in state government, the legislature, and others to address. So you'll be hearing a lot about workforce as we move forward. Before we get started, before I introduce Dean Becker, one of the most recognizable things that that you interact with from our industry on a daily basis is paper. You'll see at your tables there are tissue packets from Clearwater Paper, so please take those and just be thinking that of the myriad of products that you come into contact with, paper is one of them, and so we'd like to start with a quick video from Clearwater Paper, which is based in Lewiston. Is one of the larger of the paper mills across the United States. And with that, go ahead and play the video. All right. Well, hopefully you found that informative. If you haven't been up to see the Clearwater Paper Mill or the adjacent Idaho Forest Group mill right next to it, it is quite the sight, and I would recommend a tour to anyone who might be interested. That's going to lead us nicely into our next presenter, Dean Dennis Becker from the University of Idaho's College of Natural Resources, who's going to give you an overview of some of the economic impacts of the forest products industry to the state.
Thanks, Peter. You might say we all have an intimate relationship with paper and other forest products, so appreciate that video. Before I get going, I just want to acknowledge a couple of other folks here in the room today. We have with me Greg Lotta, Director of the Policy Analysis Group in the college, Steve Hacker in the college. We have Carolyn Nielsen-Troy, who many of you know quite well. And then, of course, my boss, President Scott Green. Thanks for being here today. Go Vandals. That's right. Thanks. So each year, the Policy Analysis Group puts together, tracks information on the forest products industry, on economic contributions, on the amount of wood harvested, sort of the productivity in the industry. And we have copies of that on each of your table. There's limited copies. If you need more, just get a hold of me. We'll get you set up and get you more of those. And we have other information, of course, on our back table as well related to the industry in each county in the state of Idaho. So let's think about that, the economic contribution of the forest products industry. We know what it looks like in some communities from an ag or a ranching standpoint. We know what it looks like maybe from a healthcare standpoint. I'm going to give you some numbers specifically around the forest products industry. So each year, approximately 30 jobs are generated for every million board foot of timber that's harvested. So let's visualize that. So that's a cube of wood that is 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot. 1 million of those will produce about 30 jobs a year. That's 14 jobs in direct employment in the mills and the woods and so forth. And that's another 16 jobs that's in support of those across the community. That translates across the state last year into about 1 billion board feet of harvested timber. That's a lot of wood. That's about 60% off of private lands, and about 1/3 of that comes from state endowment lands. And so those are the receipts that goes into the endowment trust, of course, for the schools and other purposes. That translates to about 3,000 jobs in forest management across the state each year. Those are jobs in forestry, nursery production, which generates another 1,900 jobs in communities for things like equipment sales, school teachers, and restaurant owners. In harvest operations, that creates another 2,000 jobs in the woods for logging and trucking, which generates another 1,400 support jobs for mechanics, bank tellers, grocery store clerks, those types of jobs. In manufacturing, sort of that last step in the supply chain, generates about 9,400 jobs each year for mill workers and related employment, which generates about 13,000 support jobs for healthcare workers, accountants, and other services. That's more than 30,000 jobs generated each year across the state in the forest products industry, which is a growing industry. That's more than $2.5 billion contributed to our state product. That's about 3% of GDP if you put it in context in the whole state. Now, that doesn't sound like a whole lot if you live here in Ada County. But if you live in Shoshone County or Benewah or Clearwater County, that can be upwards of 10 or even 15% of local economic activity. That's pretty substantial. We know those are important jobs in these communities throughout the state. We all recognize that. But it's also about more than jobs. That's why we have Old Timer Days in Troy or Elk City Days and other celebrations across the state. It's a way of life. It's our identity in many parts of the state. And with care and feeding that you're going to hear about here today, it can be a really critical part of our growing state in providing sustainable materials such as Julia talked about. So that's just a quick overview of the contribution to the state's economy and how that translates sort of within your communities. And in those yearbooks and the handouts that are on your desk or on your tables and in the back on the desk, you can get more information about how that looks particularly for your county. It's really a privilege for me and for my colleagues and us in the College of Natural Resources and the University of Idaho to be a part of this supply chain. You know, we're consistently ranked as one of the top programs in the country. We're very proud of that. You hear it all the time. Maybe you get tired of hearing about it, but we're going to say it every time anyway. We provide the 2- and 4-year degrees for the state in forestry, nursery operations, fire and fuels management. We train the accountants, the electrical engineers, the computer technicians to run some of the most sophisticated logging operations and sawmill operations in the country. We really have really amazing resources here, both in terms of the skill set and employees. We need more of them. We're going to hear a lot more about that. In terms of our resource base is really unparalleled. We really have quite an opportunity here, and that's what I'm looking forward here. And our next speakers will tell you more about how those pieces fit together to make our industry not just strong, but continue to grow to meet our growing demand. Thank you.
Thanks, Dennis. And I'm glad you mentioned, please do, after the lunch, we have some great exhibits from both agencies and industry in the state, and there's a lot of great information over there at the tables after we finish up. So our first topic of the day, or for the lunch here, is we wanted to really give you a sense of what it takes to have a vibrant forest products industry. And so we're going to walk you through the various cycles of both growing trees, making sure those stands stay healthy throughout their tree life, and then harvesting and replanting. So our first topic is the plant, seed, and grow. So I'll ask Stimson Lumber, Manulife Investment Management, and Molpus come up to the podium here now. Anywhere. So Brian, we'll have you go ahead and start. Go ahead and introduce yourself and your company. I don't think it's on.
How about now? A little better? Okay. My name's Brian Keogh. I'm a silviculture forester for Stimson Lumber Company out of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Stimson operates 3 sawmills in the northern part of the state, in addition to owning and managing 168,000 acres of timberland in the northern 5 counties. And we plant 3.5 million tree seedlings annually. As a large forest landowner, similar to others that are here, there's a considerable amount of resources devoted to growing and maintaining a healthy forest landscape. Planting, growing, and harvesting trees is what we do, and it's no small task. As we move into a future where large fires continue to play a role, and there's an increased emphasis on renewable resources, green jobs, this industry focused on growing trees will only become more important. To those not familiar with the industry, the term forestry often brings to mind the image of a log truck going down the highway. And that's an incredibly important piece of the process that others will talk about in a minute. But before that truck ever rolls through town, there's a tremendous amount of care, patience, and manpower that takes place behind the scenes to get a tree to a point that it's ready to be harvested and sent to the local sawmill to be manufactured into important items we all use every day. To have a forest, we have to have trees. And that might sound easy, but when you get to understand the increased need to increase forest cover across the landscape and how to make that happen, you realize how much work goes into growing a forest. In the western US, at least 24 million acres, both public and private land, have the potential to be reforested through the planting of trees. To accomplish that would require planting over 7.5 billion trees. Of that, roughly 2.8 million acres are in Idaho, accounting for over 860 million trees. The Replant Act passed in 2021 starts to address some of this growing backlog. But the resources, infrastructure, and manpower needed to achieve these goals are all limiting factors. To plant trees, you need seed, just like any other crop. But unlike most other crops, acquiring that seed is difficult. It's messy, it takes a lot of time, and there's a lot of science behind it. It's important to determine the needs for the site being planted. The tree species is chosen based on region, elevation, aspect, and climate conditions. It's also important to determine what the goals for the site are. Is it industrial forest land, where genetic traits like growth rate and tree form are important for efficiency and outputs for harvesting and manufacturing? Or is it more of a natural landscape being restored, where genetics similar to what was on site before and disease resistance and drought tolerance are important? Once those factors are determined, there's a need to scour the landscape and find trees, parent trees, that fit those specific needs and hope that conditions and timing are right for a good cone crop. And that in some instances, local seed orchards can be utilized where companies, agencies, and other entities have collaborated to establish parent trees of desired species and genetic traits where seed crops can be more reliably collected. But these seed orchards are finite in what they provide and can take no less than 10 years just to establish enough to start producing cones. It's a significant investment in time and resources and takes a lot of forethought and collaboration to accomplish. Cones have to be collected at precise times of the year, and to do so takes a lot of labor. Collecting the cones in the woods takes trained tree fallers and to fall the desired trees, and large crews to gather those cones off the fallen trees. In an orchard, those same crews are needed to use lifts to pick the cones or climb the trees. Competing for these workers is challenging and can hinder quantities collected. Once the cones are collected, they need to be dried for a period of time and shipped to a seed processing facility, which there are only a small handful across the country, where seeds have to be extracted from the cones and cleaned using specialized equipment and expertise. Seeds have to be lab tested initially and periodically during storage to test for quality and viability, then stored under specific conditions for months or years until they're ready to be grown at the nursery. Not done properly, seed can quickly go bad in large batches and make your efforts all for naught. It's an area that needs investment in training and infrastructure to meet the increasing needs. When it's finally time to grow the trees in the nursery, usually a year or two before being planted in the woods, the seed is shipped to the nursery and tested again for germination rates, then sown in containers in the greenhouses or outplanted in their fields. Seedlings are grown in a variety of sizes and styles to balance cost and survival. Nursery processes vary, but are incredibly labor intensive. In the year or two that the seedlings spend at the nursery, workers are needed to sow, thin, prune, monitor, measure, water, count, package, store, and transport those seedlings. Thousands of acres of seedlings can be propagated in these relatively small spaces, but require skill and expertise to do right and consistently deliver quality seedlings that'll survive and grow in the woods. With an increasing need for seedlings, there's an equally increasing need for nursery space and individuals with the skills to manage these nurseries correctly. The new Associates Program for Forest Nursery Management and Technology offered through the University of Idaho begins to help address the increasing need for those professionals. When planting season finally comes, seedlings must be thawed, loaded on refrigerated semi-trucks, and shipped to the landowner's cold storage, where they'll wait to be loaded in a small trailer behind a pickup and taken to the woods to be planted. This whole process goes on in the background, with only those attuned to the industry really aware of the efforts. Without continued investment in that workforce and infrastructure, trying to start a forest growing, let alone the current scale needed, would be almost impossible.
All right. Hello, my name's Patrick Marola. I'm with Manulife Investment Management. At Manulife Investment Management, we're a TIMO, a timber investment management organization. We buy and manage lands on behalf of our investors. We don't actually own the lands, we just manage the timber lands. But we own 5.5 million acres in the world, 3.5 million in the US and 122,000 in northern Idaho. And like Brian was saying, we do a tremendous effort to grow a tree and to get a tree, ready to plant. But before we can plant the tree, we have to do some things in the woods to get the site ready for planting. And there's usually two common practices. One, we have to remove slash or the treetops and debris from the logging operation that's in the way of planting, and also to reduce fuel loads and meet state slash hazard requirements. We don't want the fuels out there and to increase the chance of wildfire spreading. So a lot of that material is piled and burnt. Then we also use herbicide applications to control competing vegetation. It's really a similar concept that farmers use or you'd use in your garden. We're controlling the weeds to allow more moisture available for the trees to get those trees established. And you can see in that bottom right, the picture, there's two pictures there. And the one on the left is with no vegetation control, and the one on the right's with vegetation control. And it makes a tremendous difference to how successful we are once we plant a tree. So it's a big component. It's just, it's like Brian said, all the stuff that happens in the background that people don't think about, but we do a lot of work to grow that tree and to get the site ready to plant the tree. Next slide, Peter. Then once the tree shows up on the site, we have planting crews. A lot of them are H-2B or migrant worker crews, but then we have a lot of career foresters, associate foresters, 2 and 4 year degrees, managing these programs, overseeing we're planting the trees correctly in the right locations. We tend to plant around 300 trees per acre of all the local species, Douglas fir, western larch, ponderosa pine. And there's a lot of workforce in the background to get these trees planted correctly and to set up these forests to grow for another 50, 60 years. And planting the tree is often, can be the easy part. You get the tree in the ground, you walk away, but you have to monitor it to make sure you're setting up these forests for success. And, we have a robust industry with, professional foresters that are monitoring these sites, going back to them to review seedling performance. How well did the tree grow? How well is it growing? Are there things we could do different? Does vegetation control need to be controlled? We're managing natural ecosystems. So, you could have a herd elk come through and change your plan for you. So there's all those steps we have to monitor as we're growing trees. And we have a big team of people that are monitoring it, from technicians in the field to people analyzing data to, GIS or geographic information specialists that are managing maps and, doing analytical work for us. So it's a big project just to monitor what we're growing. And, a big component of reforestation and planting trees is research. And, the University of Idaho has done a great job at facilitating and supporting our industry with research. And, one that helps us become more successful, whether growing a better tree or, what type of site preparation do we need to be most successful? And all the cooperatives that the industry is part of that are hosted through the university are our biggest supporters of research, and we work collectively as an industry to move things forward and make improvements. And all this is, we're planting trees to set up this, future forest for success. So it's, what we're doing, we're planting a tree at year 0 to grow it for 50, 60, 70 years plus. So what we do is very critical, at getting the forest established. And there's just a tremendous amount of workforce and team involved, from the nurseries to the foresters on the ground to the planting crews, to get that tree in the ground established to growing. And we continue to grow it into the future. And I'll let Chad take it from there.
Hello, my name is Chad McElvaney. I work with the Malpas Woodlands Group. I'm the operations director for our Northwest region based out of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. We oversee and manage approximately 1.7 million acres across the U.S. and 17 states. Here in Idaho, we manage Idaho and Eastern Washington, roughly 80,000 acres. Just picking up where Patrick left off in this timeline of establishing a very successful and intensively managed, well-stocked forest. I'm going to briefly explain the importance of maintaining the health of the forest. And one of those treatments that we typically use to make sure that our forests stay healthy is thinning. We go to, yeah, there we go. So professional foresters typically monitor our forests from establishment up through their teen years, if you will, and start looking at the density. We start taking measurements. We start collecting data, keeping a database to determine what steps need to be taken next, if any. And if we determine that a treatment is needed, we'll act on that at the appropriate time. And thinning is one of those things that when we determine that a stand is overstocked, has too many trees growing on a particular site, that site can no longer support that stand of timber growing at that density. And as you see in these pictures here, that top picture is a picture of a stand that needs to be thinned. it's probably past due. And then the one below that is one that has recently been thinned, and it's been opened up, and you see the space that's been created there. There's two types of thinning that we do. The most common is the pre-commercial thinning. We pre-commercial thin somewhere between the ages of 12 and 20. And there's no value extracted during these thinnings. This is work that's typically also done with H-2B migrant workers. The cost of doing a pre-commercial thin is pretty great, but it's necessary for the health and the life of that stand. Commercial thinning is something that occurs if needed, and if you can make an economically viable operation out of it. You'll do that at somewhere between 20, 30 years old, somewhere in that time frame, maybe even a little bit older. It's not as common here because we have to have a robust pulpwood market in order to do that. And we just don't have very many pulpwood outlets. There have been subsidized programs in the past that's allowed us to do a little bit more of that commercial thinning. And if we do a commercial thinning, that's done with a local logging contractor. There's a long list of benefits to thinning, and I'm not going to go through and read each one of these, but you can read up on the screen what some of these benefits are. And if you want to go to the next slide there, Peter. Some additional benefits of thinning. And you see that top picture there is a stand that's just inundated with insects. It's got a bug problem, and that forest is dying. And then the picture below that is just a shot of some industrial timberlands that are being managed in North Idaho. Nice green, healthy forest. Ultimately, when we have a healthy forest, we are reducing the risk of wildfire. And we'll go to that next slide. So protecting our forest is really, really important. We get to this point in the age of a forest, intensively managed stand of timber. And our goal is to maximize the growth of that stand of timber, and we have to protect it. Our ultimate goal is a final harvest somewhere between the ages of, say, 40 and 70 years old, depending on the site quality that we have there. So as you've heard, we've invested a lot of time, effort, money, and a lot has gone into getting to this point. So the last thing that we want to see is a fire. Being the primary threat, we can do everything right. We can have the healthiest forest out there, and we can have a lightning strike in our nearby national forest, and that stand of timber can go up in smoke within a matter of minutes. So we're very conscientious about fire. Many of our lands, our industrial timberlands, are surrounded or adjacent to federal national forests. As most of you probably know, federal lands have heavy fuel loads. Those heavy fuel loads create very intense wildfires, and that increases the risk of the private lands that are adjacent to them. The U.S. Forest Service is typically very slow to respond to wildfires, and they do not fight them very aggressively. So we try to do everything we can on our side, and sometimes we'll lose a stand of timber because our neighbors are not doing a very good job of managing theirs. On the other hand, I want to say a little bit about Idaho Department of Lands. Idaho Department of Lands are responsible for fire protection on state, private, and industrial lands. They do an amazing job of fighting fire. They have a rapid initial attack. They have aggressive firefighting tactics, and they have an objective of keeping all fires very small, and they keep most of them under 10 acres. I think I saw a statistic that said this last year it was 92% of all starts were kept at 10 acres or less, and that's amazing. So as timberland owners, we pay an assessment to IDL for fire protection, and I'm going to say it's money well spent. They do a great job, and the only way they can do that is with this robust workforce and sufficient resources that you've been hearing others talk about. I know it's not unique to our industry, but we are struggling to maintain a viable workforce in all aspects of our business. If you go from our professional foresters to H-2B workers, the equipment operators, truck drivers, and mill workers. So as an industry, I just want to say that we support IDL and their efforts, primarily on fire and everything else they're doing. The University of Idaho, their educational efforts, the programs they've created, and the new 2-year degrees that they've got, and any other effort that is currently being put forth in public school systems to encourage, educate, train our young people on the importance of our industry. It's a rewarding career. I love it, and I know many people in this room do as well. And we need to create a passion for working in the forest industry at a young age. We need young people to come and fill our seats. We're not going to be here. We're all looking forward to retirement one day ourselves. And so I just encourage everyone to please support the educational efforts in IDL. Thank you.
Thanks so much. All right. Now I'd ask Sean Keogh and Trevor Stone to come up. You guys can go back to your tables. But thank you so much. What we wanted to do, and Dustin Miller, we wouldn't have said all that if you weren't in the room. We really. For those of you on JFAC, we hopefully you heard that, as well as Dennis and President Green. But with that panel, we really wanted to give you a sense of what it really takes to grow trees. I mean, this is up to a 70-year process that requires work, effort, and resources every year to make sure that those trees make it to harvest. And they provide so many benefits to the public, to our wildlife, and to everyone who enjoys those access to those lands. So hopefully you found that useful and saw the amount of effort, work, and passion that our professionals bring to this field. Next, we're going to talk about harvest and transport. So we'll start with Sean Keogh.
Thank you, Peter. You think I would know that. Thank you. And thank you to those of you who've attended today. Your time is appreciated. I'm Sean Keogh, Executive Director of Associated Logging Contractors. Our organization is a trade organization whose members are small, family-owned logging and trucking companies located across rural Idaho. Established in 1966, our membership currently consists of 518 members. In keeping with today's theme, from our forests to your home, our members are the ones that do the harvesting and hauling required to get the raw material for the wood and paper products that we use each and every day from the forests to the manufacturers. Without our sector, the wood does not get harvested or hauled. You've heard overall economic info on our forest products sector from Dean Becker, and I'd focus just briefly on our component and share that our logging and hauling jobs pay on average in the range of $29,000 a year to $70,000 a year. One of our biggest challenges to continue to do the work we do is finding workers. Each of our members communicate to me regularly the need for finding employees. Even our single owner operators talk about the labor shortages they incur and see when they need skilled service for a piece of equipment or their truck, or they need parts. And the local parts store has shut down because they are short on labor, shut down on hours that our folks can get in. We appreciate the College of Natural Resources at the University of Idaho for their efforts to launch logging equipment operators training. They've invested in 2, maybe 3 now pieces of logging equipment that are active on their experimental forest that give our folks an opportunity to work with them to train future operators. And we're glad that that effort is underway. And we're hopeful that our logging and trucking jobs will be included in the in-demand careers discussion that you all are having this session. Our jobs are important for the work we do and for the economies of our small rural communities. You'll hear from my colleagues how our logging and trucking labor shortages impact their companies. And when you do the math across all the companies represented here today, you can see the magnitude of our workforce needs. In order to do our part to take care of our forests and provide you with the products for your home, we need your support. Thank you. Trevor?
Matt? All right, so, well, thank you for allowing me to be here today. So I'm Trevor Stone. I'm the Idaho Timberlands Manager for Potlatch Delta. I think you can go to the next slide, Peter. So we're a publicly traded real estate investment trust, headquartered in Spokane. We own 2.2 million acres nationwide. We're a top 10 lumber producer in the nation. And here in Idaho, we have 630,000 acres that we manage. We're the state's largest private landowner. We've been here a long time. The company was founded by the Weyerhaeuser family, and they acquired their first piece of Idaho timberland in 1903, and we've been here ever since. We have been harvesting timber off that property continuously since that time. Our property's managed by a staff of 30 foresters. We've got resource offices in St. Mary's, Orofino, and Deary. And our lands are scattered across Benawah, Clearwater, Latah, and Shoshone counties. Roughly half the ownership's in Clearwater County. Our manufacturing operations in Idaho, we've got a dimension lumber mill and a plywood mill in St. Mary's with a staff of about 325 employees, roughly a $35 million payroll there. Some of the foresters talked earlier about this production cycle from seedling to a mature forest, and the last step in that is the harvest and delivery of logs from that process. And from our property, we produce roughly 60,000 truckloads of logs annually. So big operation. And one of the key things that we do there is that final harvest. So the price tag on that is somewhere between $75 and $100 million a year for that operation. I guess I just want to make the point that $75 to $100 million is all going out to small family-owned businesses, logging and hauling operations in the small towns of northern Idaho. Places like Orofino and St. Mary's and Deary and Beauville and Fernwood and Pierce and Weippe. Those small towns, without this operation, wouldn't be there. And so it's a significant economic impact to North Idaho. So you can go to the next slide, Peter. So one of the big challenges we have right now in getting that work done is just the available workforce. And I just wanted to share a few things that I hear from our contractors. And I guess first to point out, this industry is not your father's logging industry or your grandfather's logging industry. It takes a highly skilled employee. The machinery is all mechanized. It's technical. It's requires a different skill set than it used to 50 years ago. So it requires a skilled and trained workforce. And frankly, those people are hard to find. I hear continually from are logging contractors that they can't find enough truck drivers. There's a shortage of CDLs. I spoke with Jack Buell last spring. He had 40 log trucks, 35 of which were sitting because they didn't have drivers. So that's kind of the state of the industry we're in. Heavy equipment operators are constantly needed. Mechanics, those kind of folks with those skills. In addition, I didn't put it on the slide here, but in our sawmills, we suffer, sort of the same challenges. Can't find enough millwrights, saw filers, electricians, PLC controllers, those kind of people. And then the last thing I thought I'd mention, it's, I don't know if there's a legislative solution to this one, but, these jobs require a strong work ethic. These folks are out there every day. They work long hours. They work in remote areas. They need to be able to work independently and solve problems on their own. Need to be self-motivated and reliable. And my contractors tell me they can't find those kind of people. And when they do get them, they pay them well. And these folks make a good living wage in a small rural place. So, and I guess just to maybe give you an idea of the magnitude of the problem with this, we've responded to this in order to get all this work done by doing some things that are fairly costly, and we spend another $2.5 million a year just on rocking roads so that we can extend our hauling season, get by with fewer log trucks. We operate satellite log yards, and that costs money to shorten up hauls. And frankly, we're leaving wood out in the woods. The low-value products get left behind. Things like pulpwood get left behind because we don't have the trucks to haul it. So this is a real issue, and it's constraining production out there on the ground. So I guess my last message is, we fully support, any sort of additional resources that would go into career and technical education, either at the secondary or post-secondary level. And, any kind of expansion of forestry technology training programs, we're all on board for. And, I think we need to hear from you about what you need from us to make that happen. So.
All right. Fine. Is that?
That's all I've got.
All right. Well, thank you. We're going to end with Tom Schultz with Idaho Forest Group, who's going to talk about manufactured wood products.
And there we go. So I'm the closer. A couple things I want to talk about real quick. Let's go to the next slide, please. So IFG, we are one of the larger employers in the industry. In Idaho, we've got 5 sawmills and a finger joint plant throughout North Idaho, from Grangeville up to Moyer Springs. We just built a sawmill in Mississippi. We employ about 1,200 folks in Idaho. And I got to tell you, this workforce issue is real. I'll also tell you that this profession, it's a calling. Chad talked about having passion for the industry. And if you think about so many of the battles we fight, it's about culture. This industry exudes the Idaho culture. It's the Idaho way. It's hardworking people that use their hands, their brains. They are worried about making ends meet, supporting families, and expanding this across not only Idaho, but the rest of the country. It's funny, I work with Chad's company in Mississippi. I work with Potlatch in the South. Idaho is growing in its influence across the country, which in my mind is a good thing. We want to make sure that the culture that is embedded in the people that you're seeing up here goes across the country. And it starts with us. So again, IFG, we've got, that's our footprint up there. Let's see, everything's what to say. We also have 70,000 acres that we manage. We're a family-owned company. So Mark Brinkmeyer is the kind of the patriarch and the owner of IFG. Started in 1981. We work with all of the folks that have talked with you about here. A good day for me is 750 loads of logs across all of our mills. So every day I'm watching, are those loads coming? If you go up and down whether you're at Grainsville or Lewiston or Laclede or Chilco, and you see that load of logs out front, that is the result of all of this work. And a good day for us is 750 loads. We source from state lands, federal lands, non-industrial lands, and industrial lands. It all matters. There's not a single load of logs that doesn't matter. Let's go to the next slide, please. So some of the challenges that exist, Trevor was just talking about some of those challenges. But like one of our mills last year, we had a 35% turnover. And when you think about that, 35% turnover, the impact that has on your ability for production. You've got inexperienced people that are trying to operate. It affects so many things. It's a safety concern. It's a training concern. It's all of that exists. So turnover is significant. And it's something that we've actually had to raise wages because of that. Truck drivers, you heard about the driver shortage. We typically have about 130,000 loads of logs that come to our mills in Idaho every year. So you saw the potlatch number. So we're a little bit more than twice that coming to all of our mills. So you think that we have over 2,000 unique truck drivers that are delivering logs. A lot of them are Sean's members to our mills. And that workforce is absolutely critical. That logging and hauling workforce, without those folks, we talk about forest health, we talk about fire mitigation. Rarely do people think about the work that's being done to get that product moved to market. We're converting that product, but don't ever forget about those contractors. Like Sean said, most of them are small family-owned operations. Absolutely critical in what we do. So we've got to look out for those folks. Let's see. Talked about just shortage of drivers. So there's studies out there across the country. I think there's an 80,000 driver shortage across the U.S. And I think there was numbers even in Idaho, about 5,000 person shortage just in Idaho alone. So I know Workforce Development Council has got a program Idaho launched that will actually pay for a CDL license for the most part. So we're trying to expand that program, but training drivers and training folks to work in the woods are absolutely key. Let's go to the last slide. So I wanted to leave you with an ask. A lot of people up here have talked about kind of the importance of the industry, kind of their segment that they work in. But we've been working with Superintendent Critchfield to put together a concept for a program moving forward. And we've looked at other states that have done this, and we've seen these expand to almost 40 to 50 high schools. But we have a CTE program, Career Technical Education in Idaho, and we actually have an agricultural tract. And there's a little bit of natural resources in that agricultural tract, but there's just a little bit of even less on forestry. So we're looking at trying to stand up 10 forestry CTE programs in high schools across Idaho. And we've already been talking to schools in Coeur d'Alene, Sandpoint, Orofino. There's a lot of interest. So as you look at how to allocate some of the funding that was approved in the special session, like I said, we've been working with the university, but in particular, Superintendent Critchfield, to advocate for high school education in forestry. When these kids come into high school, I love it as freshmen that they can see an opportunity for a job coming out the back end of high school in logging operations, getting somebody interested in trucking. You don't have to go to college. If you want to go to college, that's fine. But we want to get kids coming out of high school with skills, whether it's certificates, and the interest and the drive to come work in our industry. It is truly a calling, and so many of these rural communities, these are the best jobs that are available. And people that live there want to work there and want these jobs. So we need to spur that along through high school. So that's a big part of it. So we're asking for about $3.5 million that is going to be appearing somewhere in her budget request to help fund this 10 high school program. In addition to setting up the programs, it's also for equipment. We're talking about buying a kiln so kids can learn how to dry lumber, a small sawmill, a portable sawmill that they could take around to the high schools, and then partnering with the University of Idaho. I think you heard about the logging equipment that they've got that Rob Keefe is operating up their logging operation. So trying to really integrate the 2-year program, the 4-year program, and then a robust forestry CTE program in K through 12 to get those kids interested in this industry and actually out there doing the jobs that we need done. So you hear about all this federal money coming into Idaho, If we don't have the people to do the jobs, we can't move the wood, we can't produce the lumber, and we can't keep these rural communities alive. So I guess that's what I want to leave you with. Think about this. How you can support our industry is by looking at the superintendent's leadership on this role, asking for how we can develop this program. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Tom. That concludes our program. I do want to say a huge appreciation to the Society of American Foresters, to all of you for taking time to be here today. We really appreciate it. We hope you found this informative, and we hope we left you with a message that we kind of started with, which was, we've as opposed to other industries, we're unique in that we've been having workforce challenges for the last 15 years, and we see some serious opportunities in front of us to help start that process of building a workforce for the future. So with that, thanks again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.